Okay, so I've been working on making masks using different patterns for the past 2 days and trying to determine which ones are fast, which ones are doable, and which ones work good. So I just decided to forego all of those and I settled on this. This was a fitted mask, and this is very similar to the ones you see with the curved pattern that has the seam down the middle. However, I like this one better because that seam down the middle, that is space where air can come through. So I was like, that's right where you're breathing. I don't want that. So this one is smooth where you're breathing. This one is a built-in filter. I also has the built-in nose form right there. So this one seals really good. It's tight against the neck, under the chin. It goes all the way to the ears, so there was almost no air gap. And then after I put the paper clip in there, then it fit around the nose, and so it was like very secure fit. It also, because of the way it's large and the way it's done for people that are requesting them to go over mask, it still works for going over masks. Okay, if you're going to be using the ties for yours instead of the elastic, I recommend just go ahead and mark you off a whole bunch of strips, and I'm going to cut all these out and then sew them end to end, and then just cut off the length I need for as I'm making a mask. So in other words, prep a whole bunch of the strips. Okay, so right here's where I've cut me a whole bunch of strips 2 inches wide, and I cut it on the fold. So I'm opening up. I've got some really long strips here, and I'm going to sew all these strips together to make, just like a huge length of stripping, I don't know, 10 feet of it. Okay, so I've been working on making a whole bunch of masks, using different patterns and trying to figure out which one works. A lot of them have stuff I don't like about them, little flaws that works this way and not that way. But anyways, I'm finally settled on one that I'm making. So to make the pattern for it, just get a piece of paper, fold it in half, and then you're going to measure up. You want it to be 5.5 inches wide, and that's what it is, so I don't have to do anything. And then you're going to measure up this way 7.5 inches. And then over here, you're going to measure 5.5 inches. And then you're going to connect that. So I've got that line. Open it up, and there's my pattern. So that's how you make the pattern. Now, after I made it on a piece of paper with just floppy, I got a folder and laid it on a folder and cut it out, and so that way I have a hard pattern, and that way I can lay it on fabric and draw around it, and it doesn't fold or bend on me. Okay, so you're going to need to cut out 3 pieces. One is going to be your outside, and in a lot of the stuff I was studying, they highly recommended that the inside and the outside be 2 different colors, because you do not want to accidentally, switch the mask, take it off, and then put it back on and breathe on the side that was contaminated. So they highly recommended that you do 2 different colors so you can always remember which one is the outside. And they said it's best just instinctively, if you're not thinking solid colors, people think of as being the inside and prints as the outside. Okay, and then your third piece that you're going to cut out, this is a piece of interfacing. So this is what I'm using for my filter. If you don't have any interfacing, you can cut out a piece of t-shirt or just simply 3 pieces of cotton. All of this is cotton. So it does breathe some. The bad side of that means it does let some particles through. But in what I was reading, if you get something that cannot breathe, which is, the air is going to come in around the side of your mask because you have to breathe. Air has to come through at some point. Okay, so you're going to have your outside piece actually would be your inside piece, the parts that's going to be against your mouth. And mine doesn't have a good or a bad side, but if it had a good side, the good side would be facing up. You're going to put your filter, no, your filter goes here. Filter goes under it. And then your printed piece, which is the outside, it goes face down. So these should be good sides touching each other. Alright, then we're going to go over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew it here, and I'm going to sew it there, and I'll be back. Okay, so here I've sewed it on this end and on this end, and now I'm going to turn it right side out. Now you could have sewed it like starting here, and you could have sewed all the way around back to here, left a space, and then turned it right side out. But I'm just trying to eliminate any unnecessary steps. So I'm going to turn it right side out.
Oh, I could buy that.
Okay.
I didn't know.
Okay, so I've turned it right side out. And I'm going to put a pin kind of up here just to hold it. And down here at the bottom. Because I just did not sew that simply because our ties are going to go there. So we could have, but we didn't have to. So I'm trying to eliminate any steps. Okay, so now we want to make our pleats.
Do I want to?
And it feels more natural usually so I'm going to turn it upside down to make a pleat that way, but whichever way your fingers, whichever's easier for you.
I just come up here and sit down.
Now some people are saying they iron in their pleats.
Yeah.
Once again, I mean, you have to pin them whether you iron them or not, so I don't iron it. I don't feel like the point of this is for it to be super, it's just functional is what I'm going after, not for someone to look at my sewing skills. So yeah, it's going to be neater if you iron it, but if you're trying to make a bunch of them, that's just added time. Okay, so I've pinned 3 pleats in.
Match R2. Look at it.
And the main point being, after you get, where's my ruler?
Like that Spaz 12
Here it is.
shot.
Okay, is you don't want it any longer than this, which is a little over 3 inches. So I would prefer it would have been 3 inches. So you just want to make sure. So let's see what we've got here. That's right at 3 inches.
Like a Red's got that HPA shotgun. That'd be wicked.
And that one's right at 3 inches. So yeah, I'm satisfied with that. Okay, so I'm going to sew across this, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I sewed across it twice to get it good and sealed on each side. Now, you can make, like the way this trim is made, you could make one for here, but that's just another step that doesn't have to be done. So if you're trying to make a bunch of them, that's why I'm just showing you this. If you're making it for yourself, you can add that piece of trim there. And you would add it right now at this point, which is, but I'll show you how to do it in the next step. All right, the next part we got to do is, I'm going to go ahead and take that pin out for a minute, is we want to find our point. So we fold it in half there. And then I come over about, I'm going to say 3/4 of an inch. And then I come down here about 1.25 inches. And then I connect the two. And then down here, I do the same thing. Fold it in half. And this, I just kind of want like a little triangle there at the corner. So, and everybody likes exact measurements though, let's see. So let's say 1/2 inch up, 1/2 inch, over, connect the dots, draw a line. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is sew across those 2 black marks I made. Okay, so you can see where I sewed probably about 1/8 of an inch away from my black line that I made. And so I'm going to cut on this side, not exactly on top of my black line, but pretty much. I'm going to leave the black showing, in other words. And I'm going to go down here and do the same thing. I sewed about 1/8 of an inch away from my black line, so I'm going to leave the black showing, cut that off. Now what I want to do, in some of the patterns I was looking at, a lot of the patterns you saw for these curved fitted masks, it was 2 pieces of fabric and there was a seam that went across the front. And I even read where it said, you know, iron your seam open. And I was like, the whole thing in them saying fabric is not tightly woven enough. I mean, what do you think 2 split pieces of fabric, you could just breathe, you know, particles could go right through it. So that's why I like this pattern, is because the part you're breathing through is a solid. So we just have these 2 seams, small seams at the top and the bottom for the nose and the chin to make it fit around the bottom of the chin. But to make this more secure to where, you know, it doesn't pull and there's a space where, you know, air can go through, we're going to top stitch along that. So I'm going to top stitch basically along the black, and it's going to lay it down, it's going to fold it over, and it's going to seal it off. Alright, so now we're ready to put the bias tape on, and we're doing like a homemade bias tape, which was 2-inch strips of fabric that I told you before, and I measured, and I ended up making like 28 feet. So when I want to make
Ain't even a doubt.
This, I just measure off 36 inches and cut it. And so I'm going to need 2 36 inches long. And that way I don't have to go and cut these and, you know, just whatever fabric you have and you sew all the strips together. It just makes it fast.
That's it.
For me anyways. You can cut out strips of fabric 36 inches and if you want to. Okay, so now, and I kind of cheat the way I make, it's kind of a redneck way that I make bias tape. Okay, so we want to find the middle, the halfway point. So it's right there. And then right there at that halfway point, I'm going to fold it in half. Okay, and then I am going to put that halfway point, which was about right there. I'm going to put it at this place where I made the little dart. We're going to pin it there. And now, I'm going to go along the edge of the mask. Going to pin another one. And maybe one more here. Okay, so I've got it pinned on here, folded in half. So we're just going to go to the end of the first one. And let's go over to the machine here. And I'm just going to sew kind of along the, close to the edge, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch away, maybe. All the way down. Just want to make sure we get the front and back. And then we get up here to the mask. See where it's, I kind of hate that I'm using the same fabrics. It doesn't make a lot of contrast to where you can see. Anyways, I'm just still sewing along the edge and this now attaching it to the mask. There I'm going over the dart. So just keep folding it in half, so about an 1/8 inch away down the edge. Okay, now So I can take the pins off of this side. Go back a little bit. And what I'm wanting to do, see, we're going to fold it over. Let's get down here to where you can see. So that's where I attached it. We're gonna fold it over, around, and come around to that side. And to me, it's not as neat looking, but it's a lot faster than ironing that strip in half and then in half again. You know, you fold it, iron it, fold it in half again, and make your own homemade bias tape. Well, this one I make as I sew it on. Okay, but I've learned the hard way. I guess what you tend to want to do is pin this in place and sew this, but it always ends up bulking. So what I like to do is just go all the way back down to the end, fold it over. See, I'm folding it over, and then I'm folding over this side on top. And you just want to make sure the needle kind of come in here so you can see. So I'm folding it over, then over like that, and then I'm just sewing it down as close to the edge as I can. Just want to make sure the needle catches. You know, sometimes I get in the middle, sometimes I'm at the edge. The point for me is just to make sure that the needle catches all. Okay, so here we are. We've gotten to the mask. So see how I'm going to fold over it. It's popping up there. I know this is not a fun point because you're dealing with a little bitty strip of fabric, but to me this is still not as bad as ironing it and trying to hold it. You might could iron it this step, fold it over and iron it before you sew it if you want it to be neater looking. That's totally a possibility. Okay, so here we're coming, same thing, coming off the edge. Now, this is the same concept I use when I'm making bias tape edging around a bib. And in that instance, I don't want any of this seam to show. But for this, to me, this is not, you know, we're not doing this for fashion or beauty contest or to see how good we do. So I'm not trying to fight. I'm not trying to cover that up. I'm just trying to make sure I get the fabric to where it's all underneath the needle. Fold it over and underneath the needle. Which it is pretty much covering that original seam, but if it shows, it's no big deal. Okay, and then so your ends, you might want to just do back and forth on those. Whoops, got my thread wadded up. And then trim them so that... Okay, so see how that side is done? See? Okay, and so now I'm going to do the same thing with this side. Okay, so see there it's done. It's the homemade bias tape on both sides is done. Two different fabrics. It would, you know, you would always know that's the inside. And they just said it's super, super important not to touch this with your hands after you've went somewhere. You want to bring it home and wash it. And then because we have multiple layers of fabric, you want to make sure that it gets completely dry. And a good thing a lot of people have said is lay it in the sun, and that way it will, you know, hopefully kill any virus germs and get all that moisture out. Alright, so as I made this one, after I got it done, actually, to me it was just about the perfect one. It was a secure fit on the sides. This goes all the way to your ears. This one up under the chin fit firm against my neck. Only place was just a gap for the nose. You know, there was air coming in here. So I was like, oh, I totally forgot that I had the option of. So I went back and took the stitching out with my seam reaper here where I had overlapped it. I got a paper clip and I curled it at the ends because I knew this was going to slide in here and I thought this would help it not slide as much. I inserted it in that open where I took the stitching out. And now I'm going to sew that stitching back closed, and I now got something that'll fit firmly against the nose.